I love them.
You love them.
I love my movies. I'm making
I
them
think
for
that's
me.
great.
I'm making them for me. Everybody else is invited. All right.
Every filmmaker has influences, but Quentin Tarantino doesn't just name his, he resurrects them. His love for cinema is obsessive, encyclopedic, and personal. Each of his films is a mixtape of everything he ever adored on screen. The shots, the dialogue, the danger.
When you say perfect movies, you're talking about any individual person's aesthetic.
Yeah,
But
When asked to name his 6 favorite films, he didn't choose the obvious blockbusters. He chose the movies that built his DNA. Raw, violent, poetic. Each one reveals something about how Tarantino sees the world. Through chaos, through rhythm, through reverence. Here are the 6 films Quentin Tarantino calls his favorites, and what they reveal about the man who turned obsession into art. Number 1. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. For Tarantino, Sergio Leone's masterpiece is where cinema first became myth. The West was no longer geography, but morality. Greed, silence, and ritualized violence. Leone taught him that tension could be music, and faces could tell stories louder than dialogue. Watching those widescreen duels, Tarantino saw rhythm instead of realism. It became his first lesson in patience, that power lives not in action, but in waiting. He first saw the good, the bad, and the ugly as a teenager, in a small theater where the sound bled through the walls. The screen trembled, the reels crackled, and yet it felt like revelation. Leone's West wasn't about justice, it was about spectacle. The desert stretched endlessly, not as emptiness, but as theater. Every glance, every bootstep was performance. Tarantino later said Leone turned silence into dialogue. That philosophy rewired how he thought about tension. Most directors chase momentum. Leone built suspense by refusing to move. He slowed time until it became unbearable, then broke it with violence so sudden it felt sacred. Tarantino carried that rhythm into his own work. The Mexican standoff in Reservoir Dogs, the long wordless stare before the bride strikes in Kill Bill, all of it came from Leone's understanding that the pause is the punchline. What fascinated Tarantino most was Leone's control. Every frame felt deliberate, every gesture choreographed like music. The camera didn't simply record, it conducted emotion. That sense of scale, the faces against the horizon, showed him that cinema could be myth-making without words. Leone taught me that stillness is louder than action, Tarantino said years later. That lesson never left him. When he crafted The Hateful Eight, the cabin became Leone's desert, a stage for moral collapse, framed in silence and snow. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly didn't just teach Tarantino how to film violence, it taught him how to worship it, not as chaos, but as composition. Because in Leone's world, and Tarantino's after him, the loudest moments always began with quiet. Number 2. Rio Bravo. Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo changed the way Tarantino thought about time. It's not a film about gunfights, but about companionship. Men waiting, talking, sharing air before the storm. He fell in love with its calm confidence, its refusal to rush. The movie breathed, and so did its characters. For Tarantino, it proved that cinema didn't need urgency to feel alive. It just needed honesty.
Don't set yourself up as being so special. Think you invented the hangover. I could sure take out a pet.
When he first saw Rio Bravo, Tarantino was struck by its patience. The story barely moves. A small town, a jailed outlaw, a sheriff and his unlikely allies. Yet every pause feels alive. Hawks didn't chase drama, he cultivated rhythm. The film's heart wasn't the shootout, but the silence between friends. Tarantino once said Hawks made hanging out cinematic. That idea would later shape the backbone of his own storytelling. In Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, he borrowed Hawks' gift for intimacy. Dialogue as atmosphere, not exposition. Conversations drift, jokes wander, and tension builds not through threat, but through comfort. Hawks taught him that character isn't revealed in violence, but in stillness. That's why Tarantino's criminals spend more time talking about hamburgers and Madonna than their crimes. He's chasing that Rio Bravo rhythm, the slow heartbeat before chaos, the human quiet before eruption. What captivated Tarantino most was Hawks' faith in decency. The men in Rio Bravo aren't flawless, but they protect each other with quiet loyalty. Tarantino saw it as emotional architecture, friendship as tension. Years later, when he made Reservoir Dogs, That loyalty would twist into betrayal, but the structure remained. He once remarked, "If Rio Bravo is warmth, my movies are what happens when warmth burns." Hawks taught him that action means less when emotion is missing, that suspense is earned through connection, not explosions. Rio Bravo was his reminder that storytelling can linger, that stillness can be the most cinematic movement of all, and that time, when trusted, becomes its own kind of drama. Number 3. Taxi Driver. When Taxi Driver reached him, it wasn't entertainment, it was possession. The grime, the neon, the madness of Travis Bickle carved itself into Tarantino's creative DNA. Scorsese's world was one of obsession and moral decay, and Tarantino saw truth in that ugliness. It taught him that storytelling could be dangerous, that film could stare directly into the abyss and still find beauty there.
Suck on this.
Tarantino first watched Taxi Driver in a revival theater. The city on screen felt diseased, yet hypnotic, a vision of loneliness rendered in red light. He admired how Scorsese treated the camera like a confession booth, trapping the audience inside Bickle's unraveling mind. It was the first movie that made madness look cinematic, he said years later. That boldness to make discomfort beautiful became the compass for his own work. Scorsese's collaboration with Paul Schrader showed him how dialogue could bleed from alienation, how violence could feel like prayer. In Taxi Driver, every shot pulses with dread, every silence hums with guilt. Tarantino absorbed that rhythm completely. When he wrote Reservoir Dogs, he wasn't just channeling pulp, he was sculpting moral corrosion with Scorsese's precision. The diner scene, the mirrored gazes, the sudden eruptions of violence all trace back to Bickle's fractured calm, his quiet implosion. What haunted Tarantino most wasn't the blood, but the isolation. Scorsese showed him that a film could feel like a diary written in rage. It wasn't realism, it was empathy for the lost. He once called Taxi Driver a movie that smells like its world, sweat, gasoline, and guilt. That sensory filmmaking guided Tarantino's future style, immersive, tactile, drenched in texture and sin. Taxi Driver convinced him that cinema isn't about likable people, it's about honest ones. It gave him permission to love the flawed, the violent, the doomed. Because in Scorsese's Nightmare, Tarantino recognized something pure, a filmmaker unafraid to film the darkness, breathe it in, and let it speak. Number 4. Jaws. Before Jaws, Tarantino believed suspense was born from dialogue. Afterward, he understood the power of what you don't see. Spielberg's Unseen Shark became a masterclass in rhythm, the art of withholding. It wasn't horror that fascinated him, but control. Every sound, every shadow carried meaning. To Tarantino, this was pure direction. Filmmaking as tension, precision, and absolute audience manipulation.
Shut off that engine.
Tarantino has often said that Spielberg was a craftsman of fear, not chaos. Watching Jaws, he realized that real terror comes from orchestration, not spectacle. The shark barely appears for most of the film, yet its presence dominates every frame. Spielberg turned absence into suspense, Tarantino once remarked. It was an approach that would echo across his career. The art of holding back until the moment of eruption, the precision of danger measured by timing rather than volume. That restraint fascinated him. In Jaws, sound becomes character. The creaking boat, the sonar blips, the soft hum of danger beneath calm water. Tarantino saw that tension could be physical, that the viewer's heartbeat could become part of the film. When he later directed the tavern scene in Inglourious Basterds, he borrowed that language completely. Like Spielberg, he filled the space with dread, not monsters. He made silence do the screaming, crafting unease with breath instead of blood. What he admired most was Spielberg's discipline. Every shot had intention. Every edit respected the audience's intelligence. Tarantino once said, "Jaws is filmmaking at its purest. Every cut, every sound, every scream exactly where it needs to be." That precision became the heartbeat of his own storytelling. Even in his most chaotic films, from Reservoir Dogs to The Hateful Eight, the chaos is designed, timed, and earned. Jaws taught him that suspense isn't about the threat. It's about anticipation. It's about the trust between filmmaker and audience, a silent pact that something terrible will happen, just not yet. For Tarantino, that lesson became gospel, a reminder that true mastery isn't showing everything, but knowing exactly when not to. Number 5. Blowout. Brian De Palma's Blowout showed Tarantino that paranoia could be beautiful. Its camera wasn't neutral. It hunted, exposed, betrayed. The film's blend of tragedy and style felt like an electric confession about art itself. He recognized in it the agony of watching and recording, of trying to control truth through images. Blowout turned obsession into language, one Tarantino would speak fluently for decades. When he discovered Blowout, Tarantino was already a student of De Palma's technique, the split screens, the long tracking shots, the voyeuristic lens. But this film struck deeper. It wasn't just about a man uncovering a crime. It was about the moral cost of seeing too much. De Palma made paranoia operatic, Tarantino once said. He admired how the film transformed technical mastery into emotional confession, fusing surveillance and sorrow into a single heartbeat. In Blowout, the act of recording becomes a curse. Travolta's character hears something terrible and can't unhear it, a metaphor for every filmmaker trapped by his own vision. Tarantino connected to that deeply. As a director, he's obsessed with framing and control, but Blowout reminded him that control is an illusion. Every cut hides a truth. Every edit is a lie we agree to believe. It's a cinematic mirror, reflecting both beauty and guilt back at the creator. He later borrowed that tension for Death Proof and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, stories about image, illusion, and the cost of obsession. What De Palma gave him wasn't just technique, but philosophy. The understanding that cinema itself is a form of guilt. Tarantino later said, "Blowout is the movie that made me fall in love with failure, because it's so beautiful even when everything collapses." For Tarantino, Blowout wasn't just influence, it was initiation. It showed him that beauty could exist in chaos, that tragedy could be stylized without losing its soul. From that point forward, he treated film not as escape, but as confession, a truth framed in deception, spoken in light and shadow. Number 6. Battle Royale. When Tarantino saw Battle Royale, he called it revelation. It was violent, fearless, and strangely tender, a story that dared to turn adolescence into war. What struck him wasn't the blood, but the moral audacity. The film trusted its audience to handle chaos without apology. In it, he found proof that cinema could still be dangerous, that art could shock and still mean something. Directed by Kinji Fukasaku, Battle Royale threw away every rule. It was brutal, political, absurd, and yet deeply human. Tarantino admired its refusal to explain itself, the way it hurled young lives into violence without justification or sentimentality. "It's the best movie of the last 20 years, he once said. He saw in it a kind of cinematic purity, unfiltered emotion wrapped in chaos, a story that refused to moralize even as it horrified. For Tarantino, the film's genius was its empathy hidden beneath savagery. Fukasaku didn't treat violence as spectacle, but as confrontation, a test of what we're willing to watch. That idea resonated deeply with him. When he created Kill Bill, he wasn't copying Battle Royale's violence, he was channeling its conviction. Both films share a heartbeat of vengeance and survival, where style and emotion collide until they're indistinguishable. He loved that the violence in Battle Royale wasn't glamorous, it was honest. The film also reminded him why he fell in love with Asian cinema in the first place, the willingness to take risks, to push emotion past comfort. Tarantino later said, "Battle Royale proves that cinema can still scare you, not with monsters, but with choices." That sentiment became a compass for his later work. In Inglourious Basterds and The Hateful Eight, he leaned into moral discomfort, forcing audiences to confront the pleasure of watching cruelty unfold. What Battle Royale gave him was faith in cinema's rebellion, its ability to stay alive by refusing to be safe. For Tarantino, it wasn't just another violent movie. It was a reminder that film, at its most dangerous, doesn't imitate life. It interrogates it, and dares us to keep watching. Quentin Tarantino's 6 favorite films aren't random choices, they're the blueprint of his cinematic soul. Each one carved a different instinct into him. Leone's patience, Hawke's warmth, Scorsese's danger, Spielberg's control, De Palma's obsession, and Fukasaku's fearless honesty. Together they form a constellation, a map of everything he reveres about storytelling. These weren't just movies he admired, they were lessons in devotion. They taught him that influence isn't imitation, that violence can be poetry, and that cinema's truth lives between restraint and rebellion. Every frame he's ever made, is a love letter to those films, stitched with gratitude, crafted with precision, and delivered with fire. Because for Tarantino, movies aren't memories, they're immortality. Which of his 6 choices surprised you most? Tell us below, and subscribe for more stories from cinema's hidden corners.